Well, I'm now with Margaret Hibble, who was born in Girling Street in 1941. But a few years after that, you moved to Waldingfield Road, and it's there that you remember things like food rationing and your sweet ration. And do you remember going...
Yeah, especially the sweet rationing. We had coupons, and we had a little sweet shop in East Street, just down the road from where I lived, called Scott's. And my dad used to take me down every Saturday night to get my sweet ration after tea. And I was allowed 1/4 of sweets, and I normally used to choose something very sticky. And I used to have a little paper bag with my 1/4 of sweets in. And to my horror now, when I look back, I used to keep that 1/4 of sweets in the little bag underneath my pillow. So when I went to bed at night, my treat was to have a sweet, which didn't do my teeth any good at all.
Well, they look all right at the moment. You've just been to the dentist.
Yes.
And although it's sort of the 1940s, early 1950s, something that you saw occasionally on Waldingfield Road, in Waldingfield Road, were cattle being driven about.
Yes, there were cattle on what was then People's Park, and the farmer rented People's Park from the freeman and kept his cattle there, and I think they must have been moved down to the Sudbury Meadows, because I can remember early mornings, not very often but occasionally, really early morning, hearing the noise of the cattle and the farmer shouting. And I would get up out of bed and look out of the window, and the cows would be coming down Waldingfield Road with the farmer shouting and trying to keep them under control, and someone would try and run to the side and they got a bit skittish, but he somehow managed to control them and walk them down the road.
And he'd have to drive them probably either through the middle of Sudbury.
Yes, I would think so. It would have been very early morning, and of course in those days there wasn't much traffic, so yes, it was...
Yes, and another change, a very happy change we've seen since then, if you wanted to go to the toilet or anything in the night, you had to go...
That was horrendous. The toilet, we had to go out of the back door, round past the coal hole and the shed, all the way round to the furthest point of the house outside, and we had a small outdoor toilet. There was no electricity, so you had to take a torch with you, and obviously, well, I say obviously, but no toilet paper, so we used newspaper torn into squares. You punched a hole through the corner with a nail and threaded a piece of string through and hung this crude toilet paper on a nail in the toilet. And it was always full of spiders, which I absolutely hated.
And you didn't have any hot running water either?
No hot running water, no. The hot water upstairs, we did have a very small bathroom with a gas boiler beside it that we used to boil the water for the bath once a week, and obviously all bathed in the same water because you couldn't afford anything else. My dad used to carry a little jug of hot water upstairs every morning into the bathroom to have a shave. And then the other thing was when I wanted my hair washed, I had quite long plaits, and when Mum wanted to wash my hair, she used to take a little enamel saucepan outside to the water tank that stood beside the kitchen door. And I do remember in the summer it was always full of, I think they were mosquito larvae, because they were little tiny wiggly insects, but that didn't make any difference. Mum used to scoop a saucepan full of water out, take it back indoors, heat it up on the gas cooker, and then use that water to wash my hair.
And this was rainwater?
This was rainwater, so that made your hair lovely and soft.
It's lovely soft water.
Yes, it was beautiful soft water.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, your hair looks very good. Yeah. And, no. So they're nice, interesting memories of Waldingfield Road. And before we leave Waldingfield Road, when your husband used to play football on People's Park, he would have to do something before he started playing football.
Yes, clear the cowpats off the field. Yes, they just played They played in just one sort of small part of the field, but nevertheless the cows had the run of the whole field. So yes, that was the job before they started.
Yes. And you went to initially to North Street Junior School, and while you were there, you remember things like ink monitors.
Yes, I remember clearly. We had wooden desks with lift-up lids, and an inkwell at the corner of the desk, and there was an ink monitor every day who used to go around and fill up the inkwells, and then we used just a plain wooden pen with a nib. I think they're removable nibs, sort of stuck into this wooden handle.
And you just dipped them in the ink?
Yes, we just dipped them in the ink.
Yes.
Yes.
And another place that you remember from North Street School was the old Sudbury Library, which was at the sort of far end of North Street.
Yes, we had dinners in a big room at the top of North Street, and there was a canteen at the back, and we had all the dining tables laid out in this big room at the bottom. So we walked up from the school and went in and had our dinners, and the library was in the big room above the canteen. And in the evenings, my father would take me. We were very keen on reading, and my father used to take me to the library, and we used to go into the library, and the library always smelt of school dinners, always.
This was the public library for
Yes,
Sudbury.
it was a public library, yes.
And it was a very, one had a sense of it being quite a cosy, compact
It was lovely. I absolutely loved going there with my dad. There was only a small children's section, but there was a nice children's section. And of course, in those days, with no television, no mobile phones or anything like that, and we absolutely loved to read. That was our main entertainment, really, apart from the radio. Yeah.
And you've mentioned time before televisions, people made their own entertainments, and something that your mum and dad did was to go around to village halls and things performing.
That's right. My father ran a concert party called Patchwork Players, and there was a mum and a dad and 3 or 4 other people in it, and Dad wrote all of the music, all of the sketches, all of the songs, and he wrote his own poems, particularly in dialect. And they used to go around to all the little villages because there was no television, and used to go to the village halls, and they would be well advertised, and the halls would always be packed with people. And they really had a name for themselves in the district. Yeah, so that was really sort of quite interesting.
Yes, I should say that your dad's name was Harold St George Whiffin. St George because he was born on
the day before St George's Day. Yes.
But he was remarkable in that he had been an organist, or was an organist, for 70 years at principally the United Reformed Church.
That's right.
Wonderful achievement. So he was a very good musician.
Yes, he was a very good musician, very quiet person, but I think for all that he was probably quite well known in the town for his music.
Yes.
He gave lots and lots of organ recitals in his younger days.
Yes. And was he self-taught? I mean,
no, he that's Mr. Vinicum. I can't remember.
Mr.
Vinicum taught him, yes,
right.
and somebody else as well. But it's mainly he mainly taught was taught by Mr. Vinicum,
right?
Yeah, who was the organist at St Peter's.
Yes.
Before Dad came along. Yeah.
And he worked in the tax office.
He worked in what was called the Labour Exchange in those days. Yes, he worked there, and then he did. When he retired, he then went to work at Steed and Steed's solicitor's office.
Yes. And we're moving away from your school days very quickly, but you passed your 11 plus.
Yes, I passed my 11 plus when I was only 10 because I was one of the youngest in the class. So,
and you went to the girls' high school.
Went to the girls' high school at the top of York Road.
And one of the things that you remember very clearly is going to the swimming pool from the girls' high school.
Yes, from the high school and also from North Street Junior School, from both, yes.
And there was something were always anxious to see as you arrived at the swimming pool?
Yeah, the temperature. The temperature of the water was always on a blackboard outside the swimming pool. And as we walked down, well, Girling Street, I think even from the high school we would have gone down from Girling Street in a crocodile 2x2, and we couldn't wait to get to the corner of the road where we could see the blackboard. And the temperature, if the temperature was in the 50s, we just were filled with dread because we knew we were going to have to go in. Anything over 60 wasn't too bad, but I do certainly remember it being in the 50s quite a few times.
Likewise.
Yeah, you do as well.
Changing rooms and things were quite primitive,
Yeah,
weren't they?
very primitive, yeah, very primitive. Little wooden boards on the floor which were always wet and slippery, and concrete floors, yes. Yeah, very.
Anyway, at the girls' high school, you discovered to your dismay that girls didn't study chemistry or physics.
That's true.
There was something that you loved.
That's right, I don't know why, but I always loved anything scientific, and I loved maths. Maths was my best subject. And when I got to the school and we started on our subject ready for O-levels, the girls did biology and the boys at the grammar school did physics and chemistry. And we weren't allowed to do physics or chemistry. And then there was the bit, did you want to carry on about the careers?
Yes.
When I had my careers interview, because I'd always been interested in scientific subjects, I was told very clearly that my future career would be either in the bank or the tax office. And I said I actually didn't want to work in either. And so I was called in to see the headmistress to explain myself, and I said that I had no interest in the bank or the tax office, and she was pretty horrified, and she said, well, we've already arranged interviews for you. And anyway, at that time my father knew somebody who worked at Bushboak Allen, which in those days was called Stafford Allen.
Yes,
which
this was at Liston.
This was at Liston. It was a factory that dealt with flavourings and all sorts of things. And anyway, Dad, through this friend, got me an interview with the lab manager, and they gave me a job working in the laboratory, which I absolutely loved. So I stayed there for quite a long while until I then went to Walnut Tree Hospital and worked in the path lab there.
Yes.
So I did pursue my love of science, even though I did do physics and chemistry at evening class, but I don't think I went as far as O-level with that.
No. And it was rather lovely that Sudbury had its own hospital and you could go to the path lab there. And,
yes. When I worked at the path lab, I was there for 5 years. I studied at the Medical Institute in Colchester. And in those days in the path lab, that was the 1960s, the early 1960s, we did all our own tests. We tested everything.
Did you really?
Yeah, we did. There was no such thing as putting blood in a machine and the result coming out the other end on a piece of paper. Yeah. Blood tests were done by looking down the microscope and counting the number of red blood cells that we could see, the number of white blood cells. We put blood onto slides and stained them and looked down through the microscope and counted the different types of cells that we could see. All bodily fluids, everything came into us, and they were all tested, literally by hand. We tested everything.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
How fascinating! It was real laboratory work.
It was real. Yes. Yes. No, I absolutely loved that. And then after that, I went back to Bushboak Allen for about 18 months. When the full-time work got a little bit too much with running a house at the same time. I was married by then.
Yes.
And I went back to Bushboak Allen part-time.
Yes. And it's a very telling story that your husband told us, that you used to go in on a Saturday morning. And just as a sign of the times and of how opinions and attitudes have changed, what did your husband do when you were...
on the Saturday morning that I worked every other Saturday morning. And when You're all right.
Sorry, carry on.
Oh, when I went to work, he would put the carpet sweep around for me. But in those days, men didn't do housework or cooking or shopping or anything like that at all. That was the woman's job. So he used to pull all the curtains in the house, and then he could happily sweep the carpets while I was out, because he knew that nobody would look through the window and see him doing it.
No, it's extraordinary to remember what things were like, and what attitude, what expectations.
Men never shopped. You didn't see a man in a shop, in a food shop, well, we didn't have supermarkets, but the first supermarket was Fine Fair, but there were never any men. Any men. Women did all the shopping, and we carried it all home with the pram, with the tray underneath the pram, and we just piled all the food onto that and carried it home.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, what was your first impression of Sudbury's very first supermarket? I mean, for people watching this, I think...
Well, it was quite exciting.
Yes.
It was exciting to walk into a shop, see things on the shelf, and be able to lift them off the shelf yourself and put them into a basket.
Yes.
Because previously, in grocers' shops, you went in, you stood at the counter, you asked for what you wanted, and he gradually built the order up on the counter for you. But there was never any choice. You didn't go in and say, oh, I think I'll have that or I'll have that. You just, but the supermarket was amazing. You could just help yourself.
Yes. It would have been about the mid-1960s, wouldn't it?
Yes, that was
Yes.
after I was married. When my first child was born in 1968, and certainly Fine Fair must have been about a similar time, I think, because I remember going then.
Yes.
Yeah.
And another wonderful memory, that when you went shopping and you took the pram...
That's right. You never took the pram in the shop. You always left the baby outside, and it was nothing to see a row of prams outside a shop with all the babies happily sitting in them or laying in them, and just never thought anything of it.
Yes.
Yes.
And you'd see a row of 5 or 6 prams with babies in them, and you'd often come back and find that your pram...
Well, my son, right from when he was born, had a mop of black curly hair, and so he looked quite strange as this little tiny baby with this huge head of black curly hair. And I'd come out of a shop and there'd be a group of women all peering in the pram, admiring my baby, but that was quite normal in those days.
Yes, again, how different things are.
Yes. You never worried. You just walked into a shop and did your shopping and came out, and you didn't give a thought to your baby in a pram outside.
No, it's very, very peaceful, safe times. And,
it was, yeah.
And you remembered how, as a little girl, you would play in the old chalk pits along Waldingfield Road.
Yeah.
Were they still there when your children were little, or?
No, I don't think so. But by that time, I'd moved.
Right.
I started off my married life in Newman's Road, and then moved up to Waldingfield Road.
Yes. But
Later
you played
on,
there as a little
yes,
girl.
I played there as a little girl. Yes, there was two little girls lived over the road from me, and I would go over and get them. And oh yes, we played in the chalk pits. Can't remember what we played, but we definitely played.
And there were some quite steep cliffs.
There were cliffs where the sand martins, sand martins had all made holes in the sand. I think there was a lot of sand around one side. There was chalk and sand in the pits. Yeah.
Yes. And sand martins naturally made some of them their homes. So
yes,
nice.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And another very big thing of your parents' life, your lives when you were growing up, and still is, until very recently, was the United Reformed Church. And initially you could remember the great big chapel in Friar Street and the Christchurch Chapel, which became Trinity Chapel, in School Street, near where the grammar school was.
Yes.
And because your mum and dad were so involved, your dad played the organ, just tell us how many times you might be going to church on a Sunday.
Right, I remember, I think I must have been in my early teens. I remember going to church. We had junior church in the morning, which was for the older children to really study religion. and we took exams from that. And then we had normal Sunday morning worship. Then after that, we'd go home for lunch. Then after lunch, it would be Sunday school for the smaller children and the older ones as well. And then go home for tea and then back for evening service. So four services in one day, or four acts of worship in one day.
Yes, it's certainly, yes.
Yes.
But there was a great sense of community
Oh yes,
to the church.
yeah, immensely so. Yes, we had so many groups and clubs, and yes, it was your social life,
Yes.
your spiritual life.
Yes.
Yes, it was very important.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I think I made a little list: tennis club, youth
Tennis club. Yes.
choir,
Yes.
junior church, ladies group, guilds, and this was
Yes.
just the United Reformed Church. and
Yes.
Other
yeah.
churches probably had something
Yeah.
similar.
Funnily enough, in those days, I mean, nowadays we've got churches together in Sudbury, and the churches do mingle quite a bit. But in those days, we didn't.
No.
No, you very much stayed in your own
Yes.
church.
Yes.
Yes.
So the church was a sort of cornerstone of social life, apart from spiritual life, and it was through the tennis club, I'm imagining as sort of a teenager or young lady, that you met your future husband.
Yes, yeah, I think we were about 16, 17, something like that. And my husband was working at a tax office, working with somebody who actually came to our church. And so this other chap introduced my husband to the tennis club. Tennis club was in Meadow Lane.
Right.
And we used to play tennis once or 2 or 3 times a week sometimes, I think. Yes, yes, that was very important in the summer months.
I'm sure. And I think you said it was the Baptist tennis club. Or
Yes, in Meadow Lane was the Baptist manse, and next to that was the tennis court, and then next to that was the cemetery.
Right.
I think it was the Baptist cemetery. Yes, and
then in addition to all these activities, you might want to go out on a Saturday morning or whatever, meet up, and the sort of places you might go to would be various coffee bars. And
yes,
things.
well, the coffee bars were more in the evening after tennis, but the Saturday morning it was the Cream Jug in North Street that we all met in.
Right.
On a Saturday morning, which was strange because I hated milk anyway. So, but we used to meet in the Cream Jug on a Saturday morning. Yes.
And then in the evenings, you would
then
go...
the evenings after tennis, we would go to the coffee bar,
Right.
which we all went to the Zanzibar.
Zanzibar was
And
at the bottom of the
Zanzibar
Market
was where
Hill.
Prezzo's was. Yes,
Yeah.
at the bottom of Market Hill.
Yeah, both its name.
And that was quite an upmarket coffee bar.
Right.
And then we had the Bambi at the top of North Street. And then we had the Bongo in Station Road. But the Bongo was the one that we weren't allowed to go to. It wasn't very nice.
Yes.
So,
And in the Zanzibar, I suppose all the coffee shops, there were things like jukeboxes.
yeah, we had a jukebox. We'd take it in turns. I mean, we hadn't got much money, so I presume we took it in turns to put the money in.
Yes.
And we'd choose what we wanted to play, and then we'd get our coffee or squash or whatever we were having to drink, and and just sit and chat.
And to some extent, late 50s, early 60s, a jukebox was quite a new thing, wasn't it? It was
Yes, it was a way of playing the music that you listened to on the radio.
Because
well, if you were allowed to.
But there was very little of it on the radio.
Yes, that's right. It was one of the pirate stations that.
Caroline.
That's
came
right,
in
Caroline, wasn't it?
1964.
That's right. Yes.
So before that, there was almost none.
I wouldn't have been allowed to listen to it anyway.
No. Another place you loved going to was the county cinema.
Yes, the county cinema. Well, we had 2 cinemas in the town, the county and the Gainsborough. That was my husband who reminded me that the Gainsborough actually had better films than the county because they were on different film circuits.
Right.
I hadn't realised that. But the county cinema was the posh one, and it was beautiful because it was all carpeted and went upstairs, and it was lovely. There was a restaurant upstairs as well. It was really lovely.
There was a a sort of a man in a top hat and thing stood outside, wasn't there? Am I imagining that? Was there a man?
I'm not sure. I can't remember that, but yes, it might have been.
Yes,
Yes, might well have been.
But there was always a very clean smell about it.
Yes,
wasn't
it was. Yeah, I can smell it now. It's a sort of cross
of-
between disinfectant and perfume. It
Yes,
was-
yes, a nice
yes,
smell. Yes.
yes, it was lovely. Yes.
And so the county cinema was sort of special, and that made for a very nice sort of Saturday afternoon,
Yes,
Saturday
yes,
evening.
yes.
Yes.
That was more of an evening treat. Although we did go to morning cinema as well. Both cinemas, I think, used to go. They had children's films and things on in the mornings.
Yes.
On Saturday morning. Yeah.
And then when you got married, and I take it you got married in
Yes,
Trinity?
we married at what became Christchurch. It was Trinity then.
Trinity,
yes, we married there.
Yeah, and then eventually you had children of your own, and a great treat was to go to the livestock market.
Yes, on a Thursday.
Yes.
Well, we loved the market anyway. We used to walk down with the pram and both children, and we'd always got our fruit and veg on the market, and then went round to the livestock market and saw the animals, which the children loved, and pigs and sheep and cows. Yeah.
And it's just lovely to think that you could do all of this
Yes.
without going very far.
Oh yes, yeah.
all
Yeah.
there.
And we didn't go out of town much. We didn't need to. No.
I was reminded also, I suspect this was from your girlhood, that there was no refrigeration, and so what did your parents do to keep the milk?
Oh, we did as well as my parents. Yeah, if you want to keep your milk cool, you just stood it in a bucket of water,
Yes.
which didn't keep it very cool, but that was the best you could do, because when we first married, we didn't have a fridge, no phone, no car, no television. I don't think we even had an electric cleaner.
Yeah. Well, what year was this be? About
1964.
64, yes. So no fridge, no television, no
No,
cleaner, no car.
no, nothing. No.
No, things have changed
Enormously,
yes.
enormously.
No telephone and computers and mobile phones.
No,
One
computer
didn't-
hadn't even been invented.
No.
Nor had television. Well, television was just starting to come in, I think.
Yes, yeah.
It's sort of
Because I
small.
think you said that 10 years before
Yes.
you had
Yeah, we went to see the coronation. My aunt and uncle had got a very, very small, one of the first televisions with the big, on the front, a big, what do you call it?
like a
Like a big magnifying glass on the
Okay,
front.
yes.
Yes, and we went to watch the coronation in their house in 1953, and they hadn't got enough chairs to accommodate everybody, so we all took deck chairs and all sat round this little tiny television on deck chairs watching the coronation. I think that was probably about the first time I ever saw television.
Yes. It's something everybody, lots of people talk about, going to watch the coronation on the television of someone who actually had one. And
That's
so,
right, because there were so few people had them that you all had, you had to all gather together
Yes.
to watch it. Yes.
Yes. Something else you remembered was the 2 steps on the north side of the Market Hill.
Yes, I can clearly remember when the traffic used to flow on both sides of the Market Hill, didn't it? It was two-way on the Market Hill, and we went all the way around St Peter's Church as well, the traffic.
Yes.
And on the north side of the Market Hill, there were 2 steps down, because I do remember my mother falling down those steps once and badly injuring her ankle. Yes, I can remember that clearly.
Yeah. Another great difference, we didn't speak about it, is what Sudbury was like on a Sunday when you were young and what it's like today. There was
Well, obviously no shops.
No.
Shops never opened on a Sunday. No, so walking down to church would have been very quiet. The town would have been very quiet. The only people you would have seen would be people walking to church. Yes.
It was a very different sort of world in many ways,
Yes,
wasn't it?
very.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there anything I've overlooked or forgotten, or you suddenly popped into your mind, or any other thoughts?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered.
We've had a very, very nice
Nice.
chat, and we've covered
have
everything.
we covered everything that you
Eating sweets
feel
at
as-
night, water with creepy crawlies in it, and how you kept the milk, and so no. Well, we've had a very, very nice chat, Margaret.
Oh,
We-
thank
We
you.
had a lovely chat when I came to see you on Friday,
Yes.
and
yeah.
you know, this is going to be so useful for people in the future to see what life was like before television, when your mum and dad went round giving concerts to entertain people, members of the very first television at the coronation, keeping your milk cool in the summer by having to put it in a bucket before you had refrigeration and things. Thank you very, very much.
Thank
It's been
you.
lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.